hear the law being brought up. So many times we hear sometimes these parables or these sayings about the law in general. Obviously, we're talking about Jewish law. And the book of Deuteronomy that we heard from the first reading is a law book in itself. A lot of times people ask me questions about the Bible, and I'm not the biggest biblicist myself or Bible scholar. But I do remember one thing that they taught us that, well, the Bible, even though we have a single volume, is actually several books. It's not one single book. And because it's not one single book, you cannot read the Bible the same way, book from book or chapter to chapter, because we're dealing with essentially different books. Some books are poems, like the book of Psalms. You'd read the poem, well, the way you read any song or poem. Other books are law books, such as the book of Deuteronomy, and so I read the law. I don't read the U.S. Code the same way I would a poetry book. It's not the same. Other books are history books, the Chronicles, and it gives you a history of Israel. Other books are prophetic books, and so on. You have to read the Bible in the right way, according to the way it's written. And here, Jesus reminds us of the law that they encounter so much in the Old Testament throughout the Bible. There's a movement that was actually medieval, and we still see it today, a tendency. It's called Antinomianism. Kind of, nomos it also means the law in Greek. And so sometimes there's this spirit against the law that exists in us. We see it a lot of times, especially when it seems that the rules or the law does not matter anymore. A lot of times exceptions are made, and when there's so many exceptions to the law that the law just doesn't apply anymore, we can say that an antinomian spirit exists. We see it a lot of times in that the law or the rules just don't matter. Immediately we look for a loophole, and the loophole is readily available. Sometimes there are laws that are just simply not enforced, even though they're correct, and even though we like it, well, the authority just doesn't bother to enforce it. And so those who scoff at the law, well, nothing happens to them. Sometimes it happens even within the church and within our own laws and moral norms and moral orders, that we seem to kind of let things slide a lot of times. Sometimes even with no consequence at all. Jesus reminds us that the law is also law is also divine in origin. And so the law is not opposed to God inasmuch as any legitimate law is inspired in God. And so the purpose of the law ultimately is to bring us to God. Jesus tells us he has not come to abolish the law or the prophets, the law that they exposed, but to fulfill it. Because the law of the Lord is a law of life. It's a law that brings us to greater life and brings us to salvation. And so that is one law that is not going to be put away. It's not going to be mitigated. On the other hand, Jesus himself has come to fulfill it to the very letter, to show us how to live according to the law that his Father gives us. That antinomian spirit a lot of times feels in its sense of helplessness before the law. And sometimes we've seen, and when a lot of the debates that are going on, especially regarding marriage and morality, people would say, well, who could even live up to this? Well, we hear the disciples themselves even say, Peter mentions them, if this is what is intended by marriage by God, then it's better that man not get married. Who can live up to this? But Jesus reminds us that this law, again, is one that brings life. And whoever teaches others to live according to the law and gives the example of how to live it, well, great will you be in the kingdom of heaven. But the opposite for those who do not extol that law. And so when we hear about these laws, we hear rules or morality, there might be that sentiment to discard it, to say it's old, it's useless, it doesn't have a purpose. But don't let that antinomian spirit take a hold of you. Remember, especially in this time of Lent, this time of observance, where we do keep certain customs and certain laws of our church that apply just specifically to this time. This law is what helps us become great in the kingdom of heaven. It's what it's going to get us to the kingdom of heaven. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.